Hi, thanks for the talk. Just wondering about the what-if machine. Is that going to be a GIS-based system for the land use planners to work with?
Yep. Yeah, so it's a GIS-based, although they don't need to know GIS to do it. So we're working with some computer programmers to have a nice interface so you don't have to have a lot of complex technical knowledge to be able to
because I've worked with land use planners in relation to cumulative effects, because they've also been asked to do that, and they've said, well, I would love to have the Google one-button approach, just give me the answer. And so I was just wondering how you're going to get past that.
I don't know that we're going to get to give me the answer, but I think that's the value of having them involved all along the process is, in part they don't expect us to get to give me the answer, and they've learned through doing this, so they're closer to being able to come up with the answer themselves. So I don't think we'll get to one click, but we are trying to make it a more user-friendly interface for them.
Really exciting work. I was just wondering about the cultural ecosystem services, and I was wondering how you go about quantifying nature appreciation or the cultural services. I know it's really tricky, but if you could reflect on that a little.
Yeah, so it's. I mean, I think for all of these services, everyone, it's really hard to decide what you're actually gonna measure to represent the service that you can get out there and collect, even for the ones that you would think are pretty easy. So what we're doing with nature appreciation, part of it is length of trails, so length of hiking trails, length of biking trails. We can get some pretty good records of like farm gate receipts, so people who are out going to the orchards in the region, how much they're spending. We can get excellent records actually on tax rates for second homes. That gives us a sense of cottages and cottage appreciation. So those have been our main ways in. We also, you could go in through just overall area of how much parkland is there. For us, that hasn't been super effective just because of the makeup of the land, but it's always a consideration for us is how are we going to measure this, and could somebody do this somewhere else? We don't want to rely on things that are just unique to us too. Thanks.
This is terrific stuff, so thank you very much. Your last point there, I think, is really one of the most important parts, which is engaging the citizenship with your team. I understand this, you're a research group right now. Mm-hmm. How do you take this from a research world, when you're doing some terrific stuff, and roll it out across the country so that we have this kind of planning happening?
Well, yeah, so it's a good question. I was talking about this with someone earlier, saying that this takes a tremendous amount more time than it would take to do a traditional research project. I mean, I'll speak for all scientists. We like to sort of be left alone to do our own thing and not bother with areas that are sort of made messy by people and what people want. That's been the sort of status quo of science, and this is a really different kind of science to do, and it takes a long time. It takes me a lot longer to communicate in French, and it takes a lot longer to go out and we have a lot of meetings with our advisory committee and with our stakeholders. I think for now, really the way that this has to get rolled out is sort of on a case-by-case, pretty small scale basis, because you have to know people. Part of the reason that I started doing this, one of the collaborators had been running the McGill portion of the local nature center for 20 years and was getting to ready to retire. And I think in some ways he had built this world of contacts and was sort of looking for someone that he could pass those contacts on. So I was really lucky to be the recipient of a long and really trusting relationship that had developed over time. Because I don't think that it would have, it wouldn't have worked so well, but it took a long time to build those relationships, and I can't see how that would work at a much larger scale, at least for the kind of work that we're doing.
Elena, thank you for sharing your research with us. I think you partly answered my question. I wondered how you decided on the location and how you got the community to buy into it.
Yeah, so it's so community buy-in really was through this colleagues' connections, and then through, as we started with this advisory board, then they were sort of well known in the community, and so once they were committed, they could reach out to the Nature Center was reaching out to their members and having members days and saying, hey, we're doing this really cool new thing, you want to come be involved, and so that, it just sort of built on itself once it was going, but we needed a few really key people who were going to be really engaged to get the ball rolling on that. Location, it's a pretty interesting area. There's a mountain right in the middle that is a man in the biosphere reserve that has had a long history of protection, and so the communities are very familiar with the idea of biodiversity and managing for biodiversity. And so we'd had some earlier interactions with the community coming to us and saying, okay, we get all this stuff, but how does it help us decide what we're trying to decide here? And so partly it was driven by them coming to us too and saying, we need some answers to this. And then it just kind of all worked, which I still feel really lucky about.
I have maybe a comment and a question. Looking down the road, when you have your whole process in place and you're down to the end of your third bullet point, obviously you've been involving the citizens extensively. Somewhere down the road, decisions have got to be made. Trade-offs have got to be made. Mm-hmm. And someone is going to have his parcel of land changed from a maple syrup woodlot to another type of woodlot or to an urban setting. And there are going to be huge costs involved in that. And it seems to me that well, it doesn't seem to me, I would like to know your comments on that, because I think that's an area, while having gone through this magnificent process, you could run into some problems.
Yes, I think that's where I step away from the mic and say, I'm just a scientist. I think that's coming. I mean, we know that moving from 3% to 17% protected land, that there isn't enough public land on which to do that. So that is going to involve some really tough decisions and some, probably some unhappy people. So, I mean, I guess I agree. I think that's coming, and we're going to have to be careful in how we manage that and how the towns manage, how those decisions are made and what sort of public consultation there is in that process. Like where I started, there are some sorts of trade-offs that we can manage our way out of. We can split the bonds between some services and some things, and there are others that we cannot. And so my hope is just understanding that, and hopefully the more people we can get involved in the process, the more people are going to understand that. The more we see that coming, hopefully the better we'll be able to make decisions that people are at least satisfied by, if not satisfied by.
Hi, Elena. I'm wondering about common currencies. Well, two things. First of all, how did you settle on this mix of ecosystem services when there probably could have been another 100 or so in there? So there were those initial decisions.
Okay.
But then, how do you relate? Is the assumption that they're all sort of equally valuable somehow? And so is the percentage changes that that people should be most interested in? And if not, was there some attempt to find a common currency that everyone could use?
Right. So, okay. So good questions. So for the mix of services, it's really came down to two things. One was the services that our stakeholders were particularly interested in. We went above and beyond to make sure that we could find a way to measure those. And then others were just determined by what we could get data to do. So we could get tax records for second homes, for example. Okay, well that makes nature appreciation easy. Some things that we wanted to do, we just couldn't get, there just weren't available data to do it. So data availability and what people were interested in sets the stage. What in those flower diagrams, I normalized everything to one. So whatever municipality produced the most of any service, that becomes one, and everything else is a percentage of that one. I did not make any attempt to say that, for example, that carbon sequestration is more important than water quality, in part because I don't live in that MRC, and I don't feel like that's my role. I feel like my role is to provide information to say, if you want better water quality, you're probably going to have less agricultural production, or you're going to have to move your agricultural production to this area versus that area, but not really to step in and say, and therefore the right decision is X. but to let the land use planners and the local communities make that decision, but hopefully to make that decision with more data so that they can stop making decisions that are, you know, just focused in on agricultural production or just focused in on tourism, and start to make decisions that are, okay, how does this decision affect 5 different things or 10 different things? So I mean, essentially, am not answering that question for them. Or for you, apparently.
I'd just like to follow up on that question with an example from your numbers. I was interested to see that you had something over 2,000 bees that were recognized, and 270-something other insects. So the bees are only 1% of all the insects that are out there. Is that not an alarming thing that should be flagged, given the decline in bee populations?
So I should point out that this isn't equal sampling everywhere, right? That would be very alarming if we had given equal effort to sampling for bees that we had for other insects. But the insects were sampled, that was primarily soybean aphids in soybean fields, and the bees were sampled by a completely different measure of you know, individual hand netting in orchards. So I'm not bothered by that, only because it wasn't intended in any way to give us a sense of what the biodiversity is. And in fact, I was really surprised. We have many different bee species, including a number of different native bee species that exist in the region, far more than we thought. I think we found 3 or 4 ones that hadn't been found in that region in quite some time. So bees are certainly a concern for the region with the blueberries and the apples, but at least for now, they seem to be doing okay, at least where we are.
My final question is this one, is what happens once your research project's finished? How do you institutionalize it?
Well, we're trying to keep going with it. We're getting up to the end of this round of the project and searching for money. We think we've got now enough to keep going for another 2 years, but it would be great to get a way to, you know, get this so that we're not sort of every 2 or 3 years out, you know, on the street corner begging for money. But the reality is that the local governments don't have the money to support it, at least not right now, even though they're quite interested and they're giving us a lot of time, but there's no financial resources for them to be able to do it. So it's a good question for which I have no immediate answer.
Thank you.